A new day begins, and Yan Kai woke up. He cleaned up and took the broom lying in the corner of the small room and walked out. Standing at the front door, he stretched a little. He looked up at the touch of gray in the dawn sky and closed his eyes while taking a deep breath. He was enjoying this moment of peace before reopening his eyes to start sweeping the ground, cleaning away the dirt and leaves. Clad in simple black clothes that were easy to clean, it highlighted the youth's loneliness and years of isolation here. Yan Kai, while wearing a meticulous expression, had his spine as straight as a javelin. Even though he was completing the lowest ranked task, his actions were very calm as he didn't exert much force on the broom. His body, as though still, carried a certain sense of elegance. With only the rotation of his wrist, the broom moved effortlessly. And his body moved. The dust and trash on the ground seemed to magically accumulate in one place around him, as though they had grown a pair of feet. Yan Kai was High Heaven Pavilion's trial disciple. For 3 years, he had trained in the sect, but managed to only reach the tempered body third stage. Yet, the other disciples that had entered at the same time as him had long surpassed him and reached higher stages. They were all able to enter the main building, pay their respects and make advances towards their futures, while he can only lament about his inadequacy in the outer courts. Achieving tempered body third stage in 3 years cannot be judged as good or bad, just really mediocre. Helpless, Yan Kai could only continue to sweep out here in the outer court, working hard to support himself and working hard in training. High Heaven Pavilion is a unique sect. This uniqueness is seen through the ruthless competition between disciples. In this sect, the strong are like kings, while the weak are eliminated. The strong eat the weak, the law of the jungle. In the High Heaven Pavilion, this rule is actively followed by all. In other sects, you might be able to school-friendly competition, brotherly bonds, and people working together to achieve the same goal. But in the High Heaven Pavilion, you will only be able to find false bonds in order to use each other and rise in power. Stepping over each other's bodies is the only way. High Heaven Pavilion's strict system is well known throughout the entire Great Han Dynasty. Although the grounds were not that large, but due to the brutal nature of their disciples, their might is second to none. This is also because each disciple's skill is akin to a tiger. And outside of the sect, no one in all the rivers and lakes dares to provoke them. In High Heaven Pavilion, there was one rule. That's to 14-year-old disciples, the first 3 years of their acceptance is considered the testing phase. In these 3 years, all of the disciples' food, clothing, and shelters are provided by the outer court. Disciples only need to focus on cultivating. If by these 3 years they manage to break through past the tempered body stage, then they will be able to enter the inner court to pay respects to the elders and become their disciples. Of course, you don't need to have a teacher. You could practice on your own. But there is a huge difference between learning by yourself and having a teacher. In a way, High Heaven Pavilion's rules do have some flexibility and freedom. In those 3 years, if you don't break through, then you can either leave the sect or be demoted to a trial disciple. Yan Kai is currently a trial disciple. He is also known as High Heaven Pavilion's shame. Compared to ordinary disciples, their treatment is very different. Trial disciples must provide for their food, shelter, clothing, for the sect will no longer waste cultivating resources on these trashes. Once demoted to trial disciple, you basically can never advance, unless you manage to increase your cultivation level quickly. Only then will the sect allow an attempt to become an ordinary disciple. The entire Heaven Pavilion consists of 3,000 disciples. While what about the number trial disciple? You can count them on your 10 fingers. But Yan Kai has faith that he can eventually become an ordinary disciple. For trial disciple who wants to survive in High Heaven Pavilion, It was akin to an attempt at reaching the heavens. Take Yan Kai, for example. The current hut that he is living in was built by him, one log at a time. The holes on the small roof, he doesn't even have time to fix them. When it rains, the water can't exit properly and builds up in the room. He buys his own clothes and collects his food himself. He is responsible for all of his own needs. Yan Kai's small hut is in the sect's most remote and most uninhabited location. Generally, with such horrendous treatment, it is difficult to endure. That is the reason why the sect only has a very small number of these disciples. Most who couldn't break through the tempered body chose to leave, but Yan Kai stayed. A few months before, when he was made a trial disciple, Yan Kai accepted a swooping job to provide for himself. Right now Yan Kai was both a trial disciple and the sect's little swooping servant. But just by swooping to maintain a living is hard. There are many times when he is cold or hungry, but in this life, he had chosen this path. Even so, he didn't play the drums of retreat, because in this life, he had chosen this oath and must continue through it. That was what men did. In Yan Kai's mind, there was a concept of toughness. If you don't hit into the brick wall, then you will never understand what it means to be tough. There's a Chinese idiom, to continue on with your own decision, I'd a plan. The sky gradually began to light up as he swept, cleaning the trails, sweeping dust from the space. Even though swooping itself didn't use a lot of energy, but without food or drink since the morning and constantly moving, Yan Kai was drenched in sweat. This had nothing to do with strength, but his poor physique. 2 out of 3 meals, he was hungry. For anybody living like him, how could their physique be considered good? Gradually, a group of High Heaven Pavilion disciples surrounded him. These disciples had woken up early, not to cultivate, but to look at him. They had great interest in Yan Kai. Looking at him with avid gazes like they were staring at a naked beauty. A sweet fragrance like juicy beans seemed to waft in front of them. Among those High Heaven Pavilion disciples gathered round Yan Kai, there was a tense, competitive atmosphere surrounding them. Looking at each other wearily, all held an unfriendly look. Someone in the crowd softly spoke out. "So many people." It was that moment someone else replied. "Do you think anybody can walk this path, huh?" That statement made the person who spoke embarrassed. For everybody knew why they were gathered here, why they were all looking at Yan Kai, all waiting for that moment to come. The deadline was about to arrive. Leaving now was not a pity. If you can grab the funds, and today, it is also a harvest. Having commotion next to him, Yan Kai naturally understood, though his expression never changed. They will parade themselves every 5 days, 6 times a month. He has already gotten used to it, nothing to make a fuss out of. He also noticed the number of people in front of him had decreased. They probably had not all arrived yet. There's a, "Wow, these guys are really bothered to come there 6 times a month. Don't they have better things to do?" As he was being discredited, he turned a blind eye to the people next to him and continued to sweep. Following the passage of time, the people around Yan Kai gradually increased. There were now roughly 30–40 people present. Yan Kai suddenly stopped and sat down in the middle of the road. Slowly, he breathed in the early morning air to restore his own physical stamina. At this movement, the people gathered round him, all spread out and surrounded him, with Yan Kai at the center. A tense atmosphere filled the air and made it hard to breathe. No one looked at each other. Instead, they were all focused intensely at Yan Kai. If people were to see this crowd, they would hold the misunderstanding that expert was in the middle. Or else, how could so many people surround one person like that? In reality, Yan Kai was only a trial disciple with that accomplished tempered body third stage. Any of the disciples surrounding him were stronger than him. Yan Kai, No need to bother. Seeing him like this, one disciple spoke out in disdain. How much energy can a tempered body third stage restore? You are going to lose anyway. Come on and listen to me, Yan Kai. Please think about us fellow brothers' feelings too. We are not like you. The statement was to let Yan Kai quickly submit and let them beat him, making the act of restoring his internal energy disrespectful to them. Though he just turned a deaf ear, like Buddha Lao. Time continued to pass by. Suddenly the melodious tower bells sounded. It reached the ears of all the disciples surrounding Yan Kai and himself, startling the disciples. The bells tolled 9 times, and from the east the sun rose. It was a new day. Everyone's breathing calmed down, helplessly looking at Kai Yan as he slowly got up. He took up his broom and glanced at the people encircling him. "Choose me," shouted a person. "I strike lightly." "Rubbish, choose me, I will be merciful, I will end it in one fist." It was very clamorous, just like in a marketplace, where vendors were trying to sell their produce and competing on whose produce was fresher. "Yan Kai," someone reminded. Yan Kai chuckled readily. He lifted his broom and threw it to the sky. The dozens of pairs of eyes looked up, full of expectation, waited for the broom to fall whilst praying, "Choose me, choose me." Time seemed to slow down. The broom turned a few times in the air and immediately fell on the ground with a loud boom, no longer moving. The broom head pointed into the crowd to a burly teenager. A regretful sound, the crowd full of resentment and resignation. But that burly youngster laughed out loud and rushed out. "Fellow disciples, this brother has won this battle today, but hopes that you fellow brothers will not blame me." "Che," one jealously said. "Why aren't I chosen? I've been coming here a whole month." Yan Kai: "Don't mention it, brother. It's not miserable. Not miserable at all. At least we will be watching a good." The two brothers looked at each other, smiling secretly too in their hearts. In the courtyard, the others had already dispersed, leaving only Yan Kai and the burly teenager looking at each other. "Trial disciple Yan Kai," Yan Kai introduced to his opponent. "Ordinary disciple Juding Jun," the burly teenager introduced. High Heaven Pavilion disciples were ranked. From bottom to top are the ordinary disciples, lower base disciples, elite disciples, and core disciple. Juding Jun said that he was an ordinary disciple, which means he has yet to pay his respects and obtained a mentor. If the breakthrough of the tempered body disciple had a mentor, then their status would be at the top of those lower base disciples. And those elite disciples were those selected from the best lower base disciples. As for the core disciples, they were treated as the hope of the next generation of the High Heaven Pavilion and thus cultivated accordingly. The awe-inspiring disciple hierarchy, though it seems unreasonable, it can stimulate the younger generation into the fierce sense of competition, which is the foundation of the brutal pavilion's regime. Marshall Peak Chapter 2. Dashing towards a wall without looking away. In the sect, there was one rule. All High Heaven Pavilion disciples were allowed to be challenged once every 5 days. If they had a level difference of 3, the weaker disciple was allowed to decline. The winner will then be able to gain contribution points, while the loser will have points deducted. In High Heaven Pavilion, contribution points were equivalent to money. If you have enough contribution points, you could exchange them for anything you want, armor, weapons, and etc. from the contribution hall. Points can also be exchanged for money dollars, but generally speaking these contributions were so hard to earn that the disciples were generally reluctant to exchange it for that. There were also many different ways to obtain these points. You can exchange them through the treasure hunt, completing tasks, etc. The most common way to earn contribution points was to challenge others. The duels were to test their strength against other disciples, and if they won, they earned contribution points. So early in the morning, the many people crowded round Yan Kai were all staring the right precipice about to fall. Within the sect, Yan Kai's name was extremely renowned, not only because he carried the identity of a trial disciple, but also because he still remained in the courtyard. Not to mention famous record of eternal losses. Yan Kai naturally remembered what the commotion was today was the 5th day from the last challenge. They who didn't challenge him previously could now. Who isn't jealous? It was basically free contribution points. Although the points gained were not large, it was still enticing, thus many people still came. In position, Yan Kai shouted out 2 words, "Please instruct." That being said, anyone knew that Yan Kai was in for another beating. Yan Kai was always the first to attack. Even with his thin body, he would always put out an amazing fight, taking the step to Juding-jun, then punch to the chest. Afterwards a simple and direct attack, then a tiger fist. His attacks were strong, and it felt like all of his energy were in his attacks. In the sect, all disciples had to learn the Shaolin fist. This fist was well known, a basic move to keep disciples in shape and start them off. Juding-jun didn't panic, because he was stronger than his opponent by 2 levels. Sadly, this battle didn't hold any suspense. Yan Kai's fist was seen coming and easily dodged by that burly body. Grazing past his clothes, Juding was unharmed. Punching again, Yan Kai was easily countered and hit in his solar plexus. Suppressing the pain, Yan Kai quickly retreated and avoided Juding's 3rd strike. His surprised Juding, would not have thought that his 3rd stage brother could actually react fast enough. With this, his future plans were disrupted. But this small error didn't affect the situation. Thinking quickly, Juding took to the occasion to catch Yan Kai unaware. Unaware, Yan Kai suddenly kicked his right foot forward. Seeing the shadow rapidly approaching, Juding saw his indomitable spirit whilst executing a Shaolin fist. But what would it matter? Even if he couldn't dodge, he would take it head on. 2 light chuckles were heard. Then Yan Kai fell backwards, while Juding was still standing. If his opponent was at the same cultivation as him, then he would have been the one to fall down. Others couldn't see the fists, but they clearly felt it. This disciple was too fast, so in other words, he first hit himself, then the opponent. But it was only his fist that was powerful. This body and health were all too frail. Skinny arms, legs and body. Malnutrition was very obvious, thus resulting in this ending. Senior. This battle left quite a bitter result in Juding-jun's heart. Although he won, he didn't feel as if he had won. To the side, many whispers could be heard. This person thought he won. Haha, doesn't that mean he didn't know of Yan Kai's reputation and challenged him? This is really too hilarious. Juding furrowed his brow, for he really didn't know of Yan Kai's reputation. He had heard people talking about him. So today, when he saw many people crowding around, he had decided to participate too and was super lucky to be chosen. After this thought, Yan Kai stood up again without the slightest hesitation, but with even more intense spirit. Without waiting for answer, Yan Kai charged over. 3 feet away, he swept his foot towards Juding's legs in an attempt to topple him. A lead whip. The sect had disciples cultivate various martial arts. Yet Yan Kai's application of them far surpassed his peers, even though he knew fewer techniques. So you could use the lead whip here. Then without notice, Yan Kai went flying away again. With 2 realms apart, also the gap between physical fitness, Yan Kai was once again defeated. His attack to Zhu leg had clearly wounded his own bones, making him falter slightly. He said while clenching his teeth with eyes full of determination. Yan Kai flew away and again. Yan Kai flew away and for those who couldn't watch any longer had left, while the ones who stayed marveled. Yan Kai, this guy had real tenacity. No matter how many times he's beaten down, he just gets back up. He won't let it go. There's up. Let it go. Let it go. Sorry had to do that. Hearing these words, Zhu felt real bitter. He hadn't imagined that his opponent was such a crazy person. So Yan Kai was sent flying another 7 or 8 times. His face was swollen, eyes were black, staggering round and breathing quite heavily. But he still continued to persist and continue fighting. Finally, Zhu exclaimed, "Are you crazy? Throw down the towel or you'll die."